In court today, former FBI agent Johnny Grusing testifying that Barry Morphew appeared to go on multiple trash runs the day of Suzanne's disappearance, including throwing things away at an RTD bus stop, a Holiday Inn, a McDonald's, and a Men's Warehouse in the Broomfield area. The agent says Morphew spent about 40 minutes in the Men's Warehouse parking lot alone.
Couldn't explain what he was throwing away.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. While it makes sense to look at this CCTV data because it's a very rare glimpse of direct evidence in an otherwise pretty circumstantial case, this area is possibly the most overstudied and oversaturated in the Morphew case, and it may be why this case has gone off track. So how do we look at this CCTV with new eyes and see it in the way, in terms of the right perspective, seeing it with the right, in the right context and in the right way that we need to see it? But I think one of the reasons it's been studied and misinterpreted is because doubtless Suzanne didn't disappear on Mother's Day, but the afternoon before. So I think when you see Barry doing those trash runs, you've got to think about it not in the context of something happening there and then on Mother's Day, but something has been going on for potentially a couple of hours. In other words, one's got to keep an open mind and look at various possibilities. What benefit is there now to reviewing this footage in the context of Suzanne's remains having been found in Moffat? Well, let's look at a few insights we may have missed along the way. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I will be doing almost like a two-part mini-series within this series, 2 episodes following this one. So it's quite important that you watch this one and the next 2 because they're all sort of related to one another. So if you don't want to miss it, do subscribe to the channel. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started.
Also today, the defense introduced evidence suggesting $70,000 was missing from a garage safe at the Morphew home, perhaps suggesting Suzanne took the money.
Now remember, that evidence was introduced by the defense suggesting Suzanne took it and ran away. Well, Suzanne didn't run very far, so did somebody else take that money? So these sort of changes in perspective that are quite interesting. And so let's deal with 7 insights dealing in terms of the CCTV footage. And the first one we have spoken about before, but we're going to deal with in more detail here. Urgency. Barry arrives first thing in the morning at 8:14 a.m. at the Holiday Inn in Broomfield. You could almost swear it was a Monday morning, not a Sunday morning, and not Mother's Day. He arrives early, ostensibly, in order to get an early start, because there's lots to do. One simple way of testing whether the job was time sensitive is to find the client that gave Barry this assignment, that gave him this particular job, and determine from him or her whether there was some sort of deadline, some kind of urgent deadline in place. Do you think there was? I mean, if you look at the circumstances around this, it is direct evidence, but the circumstances around it, does it feel like there's a lot of urgency? And then why is there a mismatch between the urgency of needing to get up early in the morning and be there early on Sunday, given Suzanne Morphew's circumstances, her disappearance, and then what actually happens on that day? Isn't it simply a case that Barry's simply somewhere else? Because look at what he does do on that day. Now, we are going to also look at what Morgan Gentile, one of Barry's employees, says in due course. Her name comes up at the very end of this analysis, and it's a very important point. But she seemed to suggest that the Broomfield job had been postponed several times. In other words, implying that there wasn't a deadline and implying that there wasn't a heck of a lot of urgency either. The other way to test the actual urgency of the job is to look at the size of the job, the type of the job. Also, how much time did Barry actually spend at the job site? He goes all the way there, leaves early, And so how much time does he actually spend working or setting up work? The other thing to look at is how much time does Barry spend at the hotel? Also, what happened on the Monday in terms of work progress? So if we look at the CCTV, video footage was collected by the CBI from the Holiday Inn Express on 11401 Via Vara Broomfield on May 10th, 2020. The timeline shows that at 8:14 a.m., Barry's phone was at the Holiday Inn Express, and then around about half an hour later, at 8:41, Barry texted Suzanne, "I made it to Broomfield, call me when you get a chance." And we know that Chris Watts did something similar. Do you remember at 0740 hours on the morning that Chris Watts committed his crime, he sent a staged message to Shanann saying, "If you take the kids somewhere, please let me know where they are at." It's interesting that Barry says the words, "when you get a chance," almost as though this is a Monday. It's not going to be a busy day for Suzanne. It's a Sunday, which doesn't really have much on the cards. The last entry at the bottom of page 35 of 129 is that at 8:46 a.m., Barry walked into the hotel carrying 2 white trash bags, a khaki backpack, a pair of boots, a dark-colored item, and a piece of clothing with blue-teal coloring. Now, the blue-teal coloring could have something to do with the, cyclists tend to match their outfits. It could have something to do with one of Suzanne's cycling, some aspect of her cycling gear. Now, what is also interesting is what he's carrying quite a lot of clothing, right? Boots and teal-colored clothing. What on earth does that have to do with Barry's work? What in particular, that blue teal-colored whatever it is, what does that have to do with Barry's job in Broomfield? And now we go on to intertextuality. Suzanne's murder occurred in the second summer after the Watts family murders. And so whoever committed the murder in Colorado was probably aware of a lot of the information that came out of the Watts case. Remember that Chris Watts tried to hide the murder and disposal of his family within what appeared to be an average workday. And I think the big mistake that he made was Shanann arrived home, and on the same day, Chris Watts committed his crime, which made it not that difficult to figure out. Whereas in the Morphew case, the timeline when it actually took place is harder to figure out. Barry made his workday, I guess, a Sunday when none of his workers were actually there. That's the other thing. Chris Watts arrives at his work site, and there are other workers there who end up observing him, whereas Barry goes to the hotel and he never encounters any of his staff there directly. Anyway, when he was loading up his work tools, this is Chris Watts, he was actually loading it with evidence, right? We know that now. And so the question is the same with Barry Morphew. When he was loading his truck with whatever, with all those doors opening and closing, what was he actually loading it up with? And you may remember Watts volunteered to go to Survey 319 when that wasn't really something that he was required to do. Nobody told him to go there. You get the same feeling here that Barry volunteers to go to Broomfield basically a day early. And then the question is also, is that unusual? And also, him getting up so early and getting there so early, I'm talking about Chris Watts, it meant that he could do certain things on site without being seen. Is there a similarity here in terms of the Morphew case? Because many of the same questions arise here as did in the Chris Watts case. Was Barry up so early trying to use the cover of darkness when people wouldn't really be around to do something? Or was he up early as part of a routine and a regular pattern of work? Now we get to the third point, much ado about what? So there's this getting up early, getting to the site fairly early, and then is the rest of the morning spent in a similarly effective way? Is Barry working effectively from the moment he arrives in Broomfield, right? let's go through that again. He gets up early, he drives to the hotel, and one gets the feeling he drives, it's kind of a straight shot. He doesn't have breakfast along the way, or doesn't seem to. He informs his wife fairly early on where he is. So far, so good. He's gotten a lot done so far. But then he spends an hour in the hotel. He arrives at the hotel, then spends an hour there. Doing what? Now, if he's doing any administrative work in the hotel, why couldn't he have done that at home? And even more, it's Mother's Day. Why wouldn't he want to do that with his wife nearby? She can make him a cup of coffee, etc., etc. Anyway, when he emerges at 10:06, instead of carrying tools, again, he's carrying clothes. I mean, what does this clothing have to do with the job that he's doing? He's also carrying bags, and it's also not necessarily work bags, but like garbage bags. He's also carrying a charcoal long-sleeve shirt, which I think he's seen in when he arrives. So clearly he's changed his clothing, perhaps taken a shower as well. And you might say all of that was prep for him to go and work. He's taken a shower, he's changed, and now he's ready to work. Perhaps he's now in his work clothes. But then what happens? At 10:20 a.m., the location of Barry's phone was near the lot of McDonald's, 625 Interlochen Boulevard, and the driver door of the F-350 opened in the rear parking space of the same McDonald's lot. So he doesn't go to McDonald's ostensibly to eat something, he goes there for some other reason. Barry is seen on video provided to CBI from the First National Bank, 615 Interlochen Road. He's carrying unknown items in his hands and placing them into separate trash cans. And this goes on for about 20 minutes, from 10:19 to 10:41. From the bank video, Barry exited the truck, walked to a trash can while he held an unknown smaller object in his left hand and possibly his right hand. He placed something in the can, extended his right arm downward into the can, and walked back to the open driver's door. And so if you want to speculate, what could he be carrying in his hand, a small object? Well, it could be a tranquilizer dart. In other words, it could be something inculpatory, but it could also be perhaps he'd eaten an apple in his hotel room, perhaps he'd opened a packet of crisps or something, and he was now disposing of that in the McDonald's lot. Barry was oriented towards the inside of the driver's door and the driver's side floor for the next few frames. So he's looking at something on the floor of the driver's side. He walked to the same trash can, possibly with an item in his right hand, extended his right arm into the can, then placed both hands and arms into the can. So it's not just Barry sort of dumping a trash bag and then leaving. He's spending quite a lot of time disposing of whatever he's disposing of. There seems to be a certain amount of care. Now, I suppose you could argue that Barry was cleaning his truck, literally, with a cloth, cleaning it up. And I suppose that's possible. You would expect Barry to be heading to the work site, though, at some point. Instead, he heads to not one but 5 garbage disposal sites. And now again, you could say what you like about this aspect, and we'll examine Barry's 13 statements to get what he says about it, what he told law enforcement in due course. But one thing you can't say is that Barry wasn't wasting time. One trash run involved around 40 minutes of fiddling and faffing. That was at the Men's Warehouse trash disposal. So if you just add 2 of them together, it's about an hour that he spent throwing trash away. Incidentally, telematics and some CCTV on Chris Watts' vehicle also seemed to show him doing a trash run along Black Mesa on his way back from the Wellside to Saratoga Trail. Both Chris Watts and Barry Morphew seemed to exaggerate the speed and thus the urgency in trying to get back home to deal with the situation. We'll deal with that in a little more detail in the next analysis. Now, from 10:47 a.m. to 11:18 a.m., the location of Barry's phone was in or beside the lot of Men's Warehouse. That's near Flatiron Crossing Drive in Broomfield. Then from 10:50 to 11:17, the driver and passenger doors were opened and closed at least 7 times in the parking lot near Men's Warehouse. At 11:23 a.m., the locations of Barry's phone and truck were back at the Holiday Inn Express. So he's been gone for around about an hour and 20 minutes. At 11:36 a.m., Barry walked into the hotel lobby wearing a black shirt, carrying under his left arm a black binder and disorganized papers. At 11:56, that's 20 minutes after that, Barry exited his room wearing a white shirt. And this is where it gets weird. You might say, okay, well, he wanted to throw out the trash and get his things organized, and now he was going to the work site. And bear in mind, Alex Murdaugh also put on a white shirt at a certain point. But anyway, let's deal with number 4, 3 or 4 or 5 shirt changes. Barry seems to change shirts not once or twice, but as many as 4 or 5 times on May 10th. The first change is understandable. It's a long sleeve shirt and it was early in the morning. It might have been quite cool, and so perhaps it got warmer and so he changed shirts. The second makes less sense because he seemed to change the shirt while making the trash run or on the trash run instead of after it. That is what most people would do. But then he changed again, possibly after a second shower, into a white shirt. And what does he do then? He does go to the work site briefly, but then he returns and continues to dispose of trash in the Holiday Inn lot. So why would you change shirts so many times and then also continue to throw out garbage? Why wouldn't you throw out all the garbage and then change shirts? If you just take note of the shirts, we know that when we see him at Puma Path that night, the night of May 10th, he's wearing a dark shirt underneath a red plaid shirt. Now, I don't know about you, but I've already lost count regarding the shirt changes now. Is it 4 changes or 5? And you may remember that Chris Watts changed his footwear on the driveway, that he was wearing on the driveway before he left, and then he returned from the well site in a long sleeve grey shirt and wearing different boots. He was wearing a different shirt to the shirt he was wearing when he left. It's hard to know for certain whether Barry changed shirts from the white shirt to another shirt, but it appears he might be wearing a black shirt under the plaid shirt in the Puma Path area that night. Obviously, investigators would want to question Barry about the shirt changes, and I think they did. But the critical issue is, if he was on site and if he started working, changing shirts even more than one would make sense. But was he at the work site? Number 5, did Barry go to the job site on May 10 or did he go to a hotel? Seems like a simple question, and you might say it's got a simple answer as well. Well, if you think about Barry's alibi that he had a big job in Broomfield, and you can hear him saying this on CCTV.
Yeah, I've been in Broomfield. I got a big job up there. I've been there all day working. So you need to calm down.
No, it's all good, man.
When you pay attention to Barry that night, he volunteers very little, says very little, but here he does say something. He says, I've been out in Broomfield all day. Yeah, I've been in Broomfield. I've got a big job. I've been there all day. And so what he seems to be saying is that I was working. I was in Broomfield working. Now, if you think about Barry's alibi that he had a big job in Broomfield, this suggests that he went to Broomfield to work, right? To do work. In total, Barry seemed to spend a total of just 28 minutes near the Via Vara work site. He was there to build a wall, not the Three Gorges Dam or the Great Wall of China, a simple retaining wall. But Barry spends less time at that site than he did on just one of his 5 trash runs. Barry then makes a call from the work site, presumably at 12:06, perhaps to lay down a digital trail that is there that day. You may remember that at 8:25 a.m. on August 13th, Watts also made a staged 23-second call to Shanann's phone from Survey 319. So we know that there was the staging of the bike. I think Barry's even acknowledged to his friends and to other people that he thinks the bike aspect is staged. I seem to remember that. And now we have the possibility that there's staged messages as well. Is it true? Well, we're going to need to get further information on that. So back to the timeline. From 12:28 p.m. to 12:29 p.m., the location of Barry's phone was at the Holiday Inn Express. The telematics of the F-350 also registered the driver door opening and closing multiple times in the hotel lot. At 12:36 p.m., Barry arrived at the hotel parking lot in his truck. He got out of the truck and carried one white trash bag, larger in size than the previous bags, in one hand. In the other hand, he carried a black container along with a green item, possibly a piece of clothing. Now, again, is this a reference to that teal cycling clothing? At 12:38 p.m., Barry placed bags, a black container, and clothing from his truck beside the curb near the hotel lobby. He then walked to his truck, appeared to pick up a small item from inside, picked up the trash bag, coat, and container, and walked towards the dumpsters at the end of the lot. Now, this part is certainly quite confusing. It's like, what is going on here? And that brings us to the absence of evidence. Sometimes the absence of evidence is evidence. In the hotel parking lot, Barry seems to throw away a camouflage coat, quite a big coat, and various other items. The odd thing is, he seems to park some distance away from the trash disposal, almost as if he wants to be seen, and the footage of him here is pretty clear compared to the other sites. And so one wonders if you could have gone from there straight to the garbage disposal, would you really have found any evidence? The other thing that's interesting to note is the truck that he drove was a white truck, and I think he's got another vehicle as well. Certainly, there seem to be 3 or 4 vehicles that the Morpheus owned. The Range Rover, and I think 2 F-350 trucks, one white, one black. Well, he drove in what looks to me like a white truck to get to Broomfield. Well, put it this way, the truck that is in the CCTV is white, whereas the truck that arrives on Puma Path is black. Maybe that's just a mistake in terms of the CCTV footage. But to me, the most important clue I think we've all missed here is simply a timestamp. At 12:42, Barry enters his hotel room in the Holiday Inn Express, and then he doesn't leave until 18:03. That's about 5 hours and 19 minutes. What does he likely do for those 5 hours? What do you imagine he's doing behind closed doors? Well, perhaps he plans the job, and perhaps he does admin work. But again, couldn't he have done that at home? If it was going to take 5 hours to, write certain things down, couldn't he have done that at home? It's a big enough house where he could have had a peace and quiet or privacy. Perhaps he's sharpening shovels or oiling some of his tools. But another scenario or another possibility is that he sleeps for several hours. And I think if you think about that, sleeping through the middle of the day, if that is what happened, why could that be? Now, we have a similar scenario once again with Chris Watts, who probably didn't sleep between the time Shanann arrived at 1:48 a.m. and when Chris Watts emerged on the driveway at 05:18. That's when his rear lights went on. Hence, he struggled to stay awake on the Tuesday night when questioned by Agent Coda. In the discovery, Coda actually says that Chris Watts had said that he had only had a few hours sleep the night before. I'm sure that that's true. So it's possible that Barry slept for some of those 5 hours. An innocent reason for this could be that he got up early to go to the job site, and that's why he was sleepy. But why get up early only to check into a hotel and then sleep there? Why not simply leave later? So was he doing something late at night that we don't know about? Number 7, Barry's alibi is that he went to where? Now, I think it's sometimes necessary to ask seemingly simple questions again after a certain amount of time has passed and see whether the answers have changed. Take his alibi. Wasn't the original alibi that Barry had gone to Broomfield to attend a volunteer firefighter course? Actually, no, he had apparently gone to Denver to attend a volunteer firefighter course. And How do we know this? Because apparently his relatives said that he was away on a training course for his job as a volunteer firefighter in Denver. And this narrative kind of persisted for quite a long time. It is what we thought was the case in May and June, and until basically the end of July. We were led to believe that Barry was on some kind of firefighting course, which kind of suggests that he was attending the course with other people and that his alibi would be quite simple, that anyone else who attended that same course would be able to vouch for him. It seemed like a very simple situation. But then it turned out he wasn't in Denver. He wasn't on any volunteer firefighting course. Instead, he was in Broomfield, and he'd volunteered to work in terms of his own business. So there was a certain volunteer aspect going on. Now, do you remember in the immediate aftermath, immediately after Suzanne disappeared, investigators were sniffing around, not Broomfield, not the hotel. They instead focused on the worksite in Salida that Barry visited apparently on Saturday night, or somebody visited it on Saturday night. And that was the night before his trip to Broomfield. Didn't a neighbor say that she heard machinery or truck working or idling on the Salida job site for half an hour until somewhere around midnight on Saturday night? And in that same article describing that, dated 24 July 2020, the narrative of the firefighting course was still being repeated. This is a quote from that article. On the day Suzanne vanished, husband Barry Morphew was reportedly in Denver at a training course for his job as a volunteer firefighter. It's interesting how long that myth persisted. So where are we today? Well, Barry wasn't in Denver. He was in the general area of Denver. Broomfield is just north of Denver. Barry, as we know, wasn't attending a course. Would it be fair to say that Barry's alibi was that he spent some hours at a hotel in Broomfield on the day that Suzanne was missing? Let me be a bit more simple about it. On Mother's Day, when Suzanne disappeared, Barry was in a hotel room for 5 hours in Broomfield. Now, at 3:30 p.m., Barry sent an outgoing message to Suzanne, "Call me." So obviously he wasn't sleeping at that point. And then at 5:15 p.m., Barry received an incoming call from Jean Ritter, the neighbors. At 5:45 p.m., Barry received another incoming call from Jean and Martin Ritter. It's quite interesting when he gets these calls. I'm not sure if there's any evidence that Barry called anyone else. Does he call his daughters? At 5:57 p.m., the telematics of the F-350 registered GPS coordinates at the Holiday Inn parking lot. And so this seems to be when he decides to leave. Not at 5:15, not at 5:45, but just before 6. Actually, just after 6. At 6:03 p.m., Barry exits his hotel room wearing a black shirt with his khaki backpack on his back. At 6:05 p.m., Barry made an outgoing call to Martin Ritter. At 6:06 p.m., Barry pulled his truck in front of the hotel and walked into the lobby before walking back out of the lobby at 6:08 p.m. At 6:09 p.m., Barry made an outgoing call to Morgan Gentile. So Barry is, I guess, expecting Morgan Gentile to join him that night at that hotel. And the other thing is, at 5:45 p.m., he gets a call from Jean and Martin Ritter, and it takes something like 20 minutes to actually leave the hotel after that call. He brings in additional shovels and that sort of thing. At 6:12 p.m., Barry left the hotel lot in his truck. So it took him about half an hour after the call to actually just leave the hotel lot. Then 8 minutes later, Barry made an outgoing call to certain people, got an incoming call from Chaffee County Sheriff's Office, and then made an outgoing call to Suzanne at 7:21 p.m. We also know that Chris Watts made a belated call, I think somewhere around 2 o'clock, 11 minutes past 2, when he arrived home. At 7:33 p.m., CCSO dispatch called Barry and informed in a 1-minute 32 call that Suzanne's bike was found. When asked to describe the bike, Barry did not know the make, but he said it was blue with colorful petals. Barry started crying and asked, they found a bike. He said he was heading that way and asked, did they find the phone? At about 10:30 p.m., Morgan Gentile arrived at the Holiday Inn Express and checked into Barry's room. Now, so it's possible that when Barry left, he said, well, look, I booked this room, you might as well come and use it. I'm not sure if she was supposed to stay there that night anyway. Anyway, so I do think that's interesting that Morgan Gentile checks into Barry's room later that same night. You would want to know what was the original plan, because Jeffrey Puckett arrived that night as well. So it does seem as though the plan was for them to arrive that night anyway. So if you think no one called 911 and Barry had no reason to return home that night because he had to work, who would have slept where? It's just an interesting thing to work out.
Grusing testified that at one point during the investigation, Morphew asked him, "Can you give me immunity if I sit and just open up my life to you?"
Of course, law enforcement have been sued, so we don't know how reliable everything that was said in court ultimately is. But anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. In the next episode, we're going to deal with Barry's effect when he arrived on the scene as witnessed by those who were there that night. Also, don't miss a live stream review of the Mo Wilson murder case later today, probably somewhere around 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.